Well, welcome everyone. Here we are in Toronto on a rainy October evening. We really can't complain about the weather though. It's been pretty darn good for the last little while. And life is just as challenging as it seems to be normally. You take a step forward in one direction and you end up taking a step back in another. And we had a little bit of tragedy this weekend. My son-in-law lost his father very suddenly, and we're just all kind of banding together to help them as much as we can. But I'm glad to be here, glad to see a lot of my regulars and some new people as well. Some new names that I don't recognize. If this is your first time here, hold your hand up in that chat. Boy, look at all these people. Good to see you, Nancy. And I think we've got Gina in the background helping me out, answering the questions. How's the volume now? I know that there's some people that work on a mono stereo system that often have difficulty hearing because the sound gets diverted to a track and it gets really low. But I do have my volume up as high as it will go. So hopefully it will all work out in the end. So we've got questions. We've got a couple. I've got one that was left over from last time. So let me just start with that one. Someone asked, can I use different machines on the same quilt as long as you use a 1/4 inch foot? So you'll often hear this from people. Oh, you can only, the 1/4 inch is different on different machines. And that doesn't make any sense because a 1/4 inch is a 1/4 inch. What it really means is that your reference points can be slightly different depending on different machines. But I don't usually go by those reference points. I put a ledge down and then I measure and I adjust from that. So I have a video on how to do an accurate 1/4 inch seam. And if you do that test before you start, it doesn't matter which machine you are on. You will be able to sew it the same way. But if you've got two machines that are exactly identical and, just even those small little differences can make a difference if you're saying, oh, I'm just using the edge of my foot here. On another machine, it could be just a fraction of an inch in from the foot or on the other side of that foot. 1/4 inch is really quite small, and it's also hard to manipulate because there's not a lot of seam allowance fabric to be under your presser foot. And I think that's why a lot of people who come from garment sewing find quilting hard, because with garment sewing, you've got a lot of fabric over on that side, and it helps feed the fabric in evenly. That 1/4 inch, you've got to slow down and take it carefully and, really understand where that 1/4 inch mark is. And remember, you do not, if you're just making squares and rectangles, you can go ahead and just put a ledge down and measure a 1/4 inch over, and that'll be fine. But if you're doing more complex blocks, like blocks that combine HSTs with squares, or sometimes there's a square and a square, your measurements can be quite off if you don't really measure that 1/4 inch. So that means taking two pieces of fabric, feeding them through, opening them up, pressing them to the side, and then doing the same on the other side of that 2.5 inch square. So then you should have a 2-inch piece down the middle. Exactly. Close is not right. So you need to adjust. And I usually do this when I first sit down on a particular project, but sometimes I have to do something else in the middle of a project and then go back to it. So then I'll do that whole measuring and calibrating a second time, or as many times as I need to get through the project. But as I say, when you're doing the beginner blocks, like the quilt that I just put out there for this week's video, the Quick and Slick quilt, it doesn't matter whether it's absolutely perfect because you're making the same seam allowance on both sides. So Margaret Litty has asked, how do you keep track of how much fabric is left on the bolt or folded yardage after you use some of it? So if you actually happen to have one of those long cardboard um, centers for fabric when it's on a bolt, they roughly use every wraparound is a half a yard. Now that's just in general, it's just a half. What I do is when I put it on a bolt, I measure it and then I write down into the seam allowance how much I have. So then when I cut some off, then I would put down the reduced amount on the next part of the selvage. Now, am I doing that 100% of the time? No, but I try to do it when I can, and that's how I keep track of it. Hazel Ann has asked, Hazel Ann is from my crew, how much room would you leave between a quilting machine like your Bernina 7 series and the wall? I personally do not like sewing up against the wall. For me, I need just a little bit of space on the other side. I always find I'm very cramped when I'm up against the wall and it's not very comfortable for me. And I often will avoid sewing when I'm put in that spot. But I understand some people have spaces where that's the way it has to work. And I would say leave at least 20 inches, if not 36, because you're going to have lots of fabric accumulate on the other side. Like you may be chain stitching a lot of blocks together, and you need a little bit of space for them to reside in without backing up into your sewing machine. And once you get your quilt going, the quilt top gets bigger and bigger and bigger. I am lucky enough that I have a quilting table with a pop-up back. And I keep it up all the time because I really like that big space on the other side. That's the way I'm comfortable sewing. Do I recommend any products to hold the weight of a quilt up while quilting on a domestic? Well, you can put up, card tables are too light, but if you've got some dressers or I actually designed this specifically for this. I've got a table that can go up so it can work with my surface of my cutting table to hold the weight. Now, there's a woman in our quilt crew, Valerie Lapointe, who devised a tubing system. She did it out of PVC tubing, and she just made an apparatus. It was an arch that went over the side of her sewing table. I think she had it on both sides, the back and the side. And she had some pincers, some clamps that hung from that, and she would just hold up the weight of the quilt that way. So you can use your imagination as well. I've often had a chair or a stool right beside me just to have it. Who is it? Yeah, I think that's but it is important for you to manage that weight and don't think that there's going to be a time when you can push through a lot of fabric without stopping. Like it is something where you're going to push some, you're going to stop, you're going to reorganize, keep everything flat and push along. It's not a fast process. I've answered all those ones. So who all is here? Let me just give a moment here for everyone. Shelley Wick from Virginia, Carson City, Nevada. Lisa Gervais, nice to see you here. Mary Pender from Midland, Ontario. Jessica, you're in Seattle this week. Jessica has asked if I still bullet journal. And I didn't for a little while, but I'm back to it. I have mine right here. Found this cute clamp the other day where it would hold my pen. That's one of the challenges that I have with my bullet journal, that I keep it that I keep writing material with all the time. Uh, I've gone back to it because I'm just finding I'm more centered when I'm writing down what's going on in my day. It's not a journal so much as it's telling me what I have to do at certain times and sort of dividing up tasks and me putting down a plan to actually execute those tasks. I'm finding on a computer, yes, it's great to have some all the information there, but on a day-to-day basis, trying to get what I need to get done in a plan, I need to have that writing done. So I'm doing that. I've actually went to a cursive script class a couple of weeks ago, so now I'm taking my felt tip pen and I'm doing practice on a daily basis, trying to get those curves, that beautiful copperplate writing going on. And I'm not going to say I'm an expert. I mean, if I go slow, it's much better than if I go fast, but it's a challenge. It's a challenge, but I do like good writing materials. I've always been attracted to stationery, so I'm trying to use some of it up again. D. Dalmas is asking, I'm looking for the video that shows you cutting a block into smaller blocks and then turning them into different directions to make a different quilt pattern. That is called the Disappearing 9 Patch, and the video looks like this. And I did that earlier this year. I remember doing that after I came back from retreat, so it probably was published around May. So if you find it, let me see, do I even have a link here? Gina gave me the link, so I can just pop it into the feed there. Copy. Can I put it in there? Yeah, here we go. There, I added it. So there's a fast link to it. I actually enjoyed doing that. I love puzzles. I love doing things, trying to figure out a faster way. When machine quilting with a dark backing and a fairly light medium top, what color thread do you use in your bobbin? I think you're asking this because often when you use a dark thread, if your tension's not perfect, that dark thread comes up to the top. And even if you do work and have very good tension, sometimes when you go around curves, the tension goes off a little bit and that darker thread can come through. So I'm always looking at something in between. Depending on, I don't really like working with white on the front, so I'm never that light on the top. But, you know, I can be working with a yellow or a light blue, and I really do not want a black on the back. So I'll go to a gray or a beige on the back, and I'm just trying to find something where there's two mediums. I don't often use the same color on the front and the back, but I will try to get them the same value. So when they pop through, they're not that noticeable. So. Hello, Lisa Harrison. I see that. Thank you for teaching me to sew. Well, I'm so glad you learned how to sew. Have I made a video on how to cost out a quilt that I made? No, I have not. I mean, there's different schools of thought on how to cost things out. Sorry, thought I had do not disturb on. I've definitely done the exercise when I have charged people for making a commission quilt. So there's a couple of different ways of looking at it. One, you can look at all the yardage that you've used. Forget about that you might be able to use the scraps on something. It's the actual yardage that you've used. And then there's the batting and the backing and the thread. And you cannot really cost thread. So you end up sort of throwing in like a plug figure to cover all those little things, the wear and tear on your tools and things like that. It's also very hard to you know, think about your labor, because where does labor start? Does it start when you have the idea and you're thinking through all your ideas and, you know, going through different iterations of the pattern and then settling on it and figuring out the colors and how many times do you go to the store? Even though you may have it in your stash, you actually did at one point go to the store. So, and then you charge out your time. And if you were retail, they would take all those costs and double it. And there's very few people that will pay that kind of price tag for a quilt. So often we don't end up doubling it, but I know every time I do it, I charge at least a third more than I think I should, because I never ever account for all the time and the the backward steps I have to take, because you know, there's just so much of it that you just lose track of. So that's the way I've gone about it. I've calculated how much the materials were. I plug in a figure for wear and tear and thread. I calculate what I think my time will be, and then I take all those costs and I add a third to it. Holding some fabric from the 90s, trying to decide a pattern, suggestion or tips I need to pay attention to. I'm not quite sure what you're worried about from the 90s. Like, what is it in the fabric that you think that there's something special that you need to do differently? Is it the age? Betty O'Farrell has asked, I'm hand quilting a deep purple quilt and the batting keeps popping through the needle holes. What can you do? Well, there's a couple of issues there. Most likely you have a spur on your needle, which is grabbing the wool. I'm not sure if you've got wool. Wool is very problematic for this, and is pulling it through. You need to change your needle. Sometimes you'll have to change your needle a couple of times to find the right size of needle that's going to work without pulling that batting through. And sometimes you'll get it on the back. It's called bearding, and wool is very problematic for it, but I've had a problem recently with some cotton batting and some digital fabric that I had. They were just not working together very nicely, and I had little tufts coming out in the back. So yeah, sometimes you can't do anything, unfortunately, for at least the stuff that you've already done. There's not much you can do. So often people will will rip those stitches out and they'll start again. But again, that's one reason why you should do a tester at the beginning, so that you know you can even be halfway through and your needle will get a spur. So sometimes you have to change your needle a couple of times. It's not a good situation to be in. There's no nice answer to that question. It's sort of like damage control and trying to, you might be, yeah. It's just not a good spot to be in. But change your needle. You can, like, yeah, you change your needle, play with the size. You may try changing your thread. Yeah, yeah, I don't know how far through that you've got this problem on. I'm sorry. Debbie Craig has asked, how do you quilt on a long arm, a quilt that's larger than the capacity of the frame? I actually really don't know that answer. I know when I've had an issue with sometimes my material for the back is larger than my runners, and I just kind of let it hang off. But if you're quilting something larger than your quilt frame, and of course you probably obviously know that you can change it sideways and it still will be too big for your frame. So I can't give you a good answer for that because I really don't know. I'm sure there's going to be other long armors that could probably answer that question. My first answer is to fold over, but if you fold over, what's going to happen is that as you roll it forward, this fabric is is going to be a bigger circumference on the roller than the other side will be. So I really don't have a good answer for that one, sorry. Mary Sue Carl has asked, do you have a video about interfacing? I do not. And I don't have one because we don't use a lot of interfacing in quilting. So that's the reason why. Rivka Shanowski has asked, when I start planning a new project, I get overwhelmed by color choices. Don't know how to get past that. Well, I'm not quite sure what part of the color choices overwhelm you. There certainly are a lot of beautiful colors out there. So try to think of, I don't know whether you're planning your own pattern or you're choosing from another pattern. So let's say you've seen a pattern on the wall that you really like and you want to make. The easiest thing to do is to sit down and analyze the colors in that quilt. So how many colors are there? Now, I'm not talking about how many shades there are. I'm talking about how many colors are there. And remember that brown is either a dark yellow or a dark orange. Sometimes it's a dark red. And you get some greeny browns too. And then the grays, when they get, those are dark purples, dark blues, and dark greens as well. So we're looking at how many colors are in it. And often you'll find out that there's only 2. There may be 3. Occasionally there's 4. We're talking about a quilt that has a block pattern in it. They usually only work with 4 at the most. And from there, once you've identified how many colors there are, then you take a look at how many shades of those colors there are. So then you know how many fabrics you need. And then from there, you just apply your own color zone to it. So if they've got, let's say it's a red, blue, yellow, and you don't like those colors. You like only working with greens. So what you could do is you can have a green, you can have a bluey green, and you can have a yellowy green. Or you could have a green, greeny blue, and a blue, and work from there. And those will be your 3 colors, and then you find darker and lighter versions of them. So just try to think of a color harmony and think of a pattern in terms of how many colors. So many times we just see all the patterns, all the fabrics, all the shades, and it's just so overwhelming. So just reduce those questions down to the few. How many colors, how many shades of those colors, and how can I apply my own colors to that? And I like color. I like lots of colors. I like lots of colors all the time. And I'm always much more successful when I reduce the number of colors that I have. Just like the quilt behind me here. So that's an orange, and it's truly just an orange and a blue. Now you can see that there's many shades of blue. There's actually 5 shades of blue in this, and then 3 shades of orange. We've got this one, we've got the darker one, and then we have a very, very pale one right here. So it does look like there's a lot of colors, but there's really only 2. So try and think that way. Sean Schneider has said, I need to repair a hole in a quilt. Should I use a piece of fabric with interfacing on the inside, then patch on an outside? It depends on how large the hole is. I have a video, 5 different ways how to repair holes. Sometimes you can just put a patch on top of it, especially if the batting has not been disturbed underneath. When the batting is disturbed underneath, you've got to do a little bit more care. You have to figure out what kind of batting it is, and if it's a well-washed quilt, then you need to just shrink that piece of batting to go in there. I would think that you should think of it more of a patch than as a piece of block. And I think the repair will be much easier. And I do have that video. Just look under my videos under 5 ways to repair a hole. Yeah. What is a good and easy charity quilt pattern? I have Stash Buster number 1 is a really good charity quilt pattern. My ugly quilt pattern, which I believe is Stash Buster number 5, is also a really good charity quilt pattern. Any one of my Stash Busters are really good for charity quilts. Some of them are really good at using up scrap blocks. Some of them are really good just working with a lot of different colors of donated fabric. And yeah, I would start with Stash Buster number 1. That is a really good charity quilt pattern. Vicki Hoffman has asked, could you please direct me to the video you did on the potato chip block? I found one, but I'm looking for the other one I saw sometime in the last 2 years. Okay, so I have done 3 potato chip block quilts this year. One is Stash Buster number 12, which I believe was called Chip It Good. Then I had Chippy Chains. What was the other one? Oh, the other one was Chips and Jelly and Chips, or Chips and Jelly. Now, the actual original potato chip block is not mine. That would have been in a video by somebody else, but it's 2 potato chips up and down, then 2 on the sides, and then it goes 2 potato chips beside that, and 2 on top, and then 3 and 3. I think that's how it goes. I'm searching for the video when you rescued a quilt where the red had run. Any ideas which one? That wasn't my video. I have not done any videos on fabric that has run. Erica Ent has done a great video. She had a beautiful red and white quilt that the colors ran on it, and she threw it in the bathtub and she soaked it, and she had a fair amount of success in fixing it. So the trick when the fabric runs is to throw it into a bathtub with Dawn and let it soak, and you'll see the color come out in the water, and you rinse it all out, and then you start again. And when the red stops running, that's when you can take, that means it's done. And it should come out of if you have not dried the quilt, it just ran in the wash and it didn't get dried in a hot dryer, you should have fairly good success at getting that color out of your white if you just continue to soak it. Laura Norton has asked, how do you determine how wide sashing can be without being too wide? So I did a video on sashing, and there's a couple of things that you need to consider. One is how much you want the sashing to pop. Do you want your quilt blocks to shine, or are you wanting that sashing to calm down a busy color story? Sometimes you want the blocks to disappear a lot as well. So always choose a sashing width which is a multiple of the size of the block. So my example, I had 6-inch blocks, so you could have done 1-inch sashing, you could have done 1.5 inch, you could do 2-inch, you could do 3-inch. And the best way to see what works well for what you like is just to fold the fabric right up against your blocks and just get the idea of the type of width that you want. And then that multiplies, that adds so much width to your quilt. So sometimes it plays havoc with your layout because that's just too much width. Sometimes it isn't enough. And blocks as you lay them out on your quilt, do better if there's an odd number of columns and rows, and that's so that there's an actual center to your quilt. So we do better when there's a row of bricks. I keep calling them bricks today, I don't know why. There's a row of blocks dead in the middle, and then your blocks go out from that equal distance on both sides. Sometimes people do it with the sashing down the middle, but it's usually more aesthetically pleasing to our eyes to have that odd number block in the middle. So you're working with pen and paper and just trying to figure out, you've got to do the math and try and figure out what works best. Sometimes it's a gentle negotiation. Sometimes you can add, if you're short any width, you can just add a bigger sashing onto the outside, and that will take up the difference. So unfortunately, you just have to put pen to paper. Now, I have found the easiest one to do it with is just grid paper. Do I have any here? No, I don't have my grid paper here. Buy grid paper, which is 4 squares to the inch, because that's really easy to figure out the math and fairly easy to draw. It doesn't matter whether you have them in letter size sheets or legal or tabloid, just glue them together or tape them together. And then you draw out the size of the quilt that you want, draw the size of your mattress, and then you just do the math from there. Is there something like Disappearing 9 patch? This is Babs Zilla for a log cabin pattern. I'm working on a log cabin baby blanket, and I'm not liking it because the colors aren't organized in lights and darks, mostly darks. I don't know of one. The whole idea behind the disappearing thing was things fit really nicely as you twirl them around. Log cabin blocks are square with the center off to the side. There's L blocks. Unfortunately, without seeing your quilt, I really couldn't make a good recommendation on the best thing for it. Sometimes, if you're just doing log cabin blocks and you want them to be lighter, you could make some just lighter and just throw that in as the contrast to the rest of the baby quilt. But unfortunately, without seeing in person, I really couldn't give you a good answer on that one. Lisa Harrison has said, when I got diagnosed with ALS, I bought a mid-range Brother machine, and your chip block quilt is the first thing I made. Not a quilt in my history, but this quilt is my diagnosis quilt, and I sleep with it. That is very nice to hear that gives you some comfort. I know I have another friend that has ALS, and it's a aggressive disease. I'm so sorry that it's part of your life, but it's really nice to hear that you've got a quilt that can provide you some warmth and love. We have a real newbie here. We have a person by the name of KK who says, what is long arm quilting? Well, just Google it, because long arm machines, on a domestic sewing machine, so you have your motor over here, and there's a harp that leads down to the sewing head. And things work because there's feed dogs that you feed your fabric through your machine, and you're using your muscles to move your fabric through. On a long arm machine, it's the opposite. Your fabric stays still, and the head of the sewing machine moves around. It's a very large machine, and you can get really, really big ones as well. Some of them are as small as 6 feet wide. Some of them are as big as 14 or 16 feet wide. I have something in the middle, but it still takes up a lot of space. And they also are not cheap. So you need both space and money to have one. But it's a different principle. So I find it's easier on my body because I'm just moving the head around. But there's a whole new skill set to learn, so it can be challenging. Crochet has asked, what is my favorite scrap pattern? Well, I must admit I'm pretty fond of my scrap strips, my adding machine strips. That's what I use a lot of scrap for, but I have a series of different blocks that I make. Some of them depend on the day of the week. Sometimes I can get bored making them, but I make a lot of, I did a video called 10 scrap blocks. Scrap sampler blocks, 10 scrap sampler blocks. It was one of my first 25 videos. I know it's right back there in the very beginning, but I still use it all the time. So it's called Hole in the Middle, and the other one's the Cross. So I cut things into 6.5-inch strips and 2.5-inch strips. 6.5-inch by 2.5-inch, and then 2.5-inch squares. And as I make as scraps appear, I just keep processing them into 2.5-inch strips, and then I cut them down into the sizes that I need. And I use them, I call them bonus blocks. I use them to start off my sewing at the beginning of the day, almost like a practice block, making sure everything's working on the machine. I often forget to reduce my stitch size, and that will remind me. But they accumulate over time. It's not something that I make in one day. So I have a stack of about this high of scrap blocks right at the moment. So I do need to make a couple of scrap quilts out of them. But I think that's probably the one that I use the most, is the hole in the middle and the cross. And that just depends on how much scrap I have. But I have done, there's the pattern that I have for, I think it's Scrap Buster number 7, where I've done it with 2.5 by 4.5-inch strips, and I've done it with 6.5 by 2.5-inch strips. And those ones, the first one I stack by the 8, and the second one I stack by the 6 in a row. 4 in a row, 6 in a row. I apologize. And it eats up an awful lot of scrap. Okay, we are at the half-minute mark. So if you don't know, I've had a couple of videos out just recently. The Quick and Slick quilt just came out the other day, so I hope you have an opportunity to see this. This was designed specifically for brand new quilters. The only thing I presume while you're making the quilt is that you know how to use a sewing machine. That's it. It's just very, very basic. You don't even have to do a lot of measuring. You just have to cut out the blocks in 5-inch squares, and if you use charm squares, you don't even have to do that. You put a piece of masking tape on the wall and you fill it with blocks. It's going to be a 3-part series. The first one is how to make the top. The second one's how to finish the quilt. And the third one is how you can take this one technique and have so many different possibilities from it. So I'm looking forward to sharing those ones with you. What else? Oh, and with the Quick and Slick, I'm also announcing I'm starting these video guides. There's a beginner video, early beginner guide, because I have so many free resources, both on my YouTube channel and on my website, and it just tells you where to find all these things. So if you don't know how to bind, there's a video on how to bind. If you don't know what size of quilt you should make, there's a link to quilt sizes compared to mattress sizes, and just go from there. Before that, if you are a garment sewer and you are about to make your first quilt, I did do this video called Sewing versus Quilting, because you will be shocked at how many differences there are between the two skill sets. I know I was shocked when I when I first started. I just made so many mistakes. And I just thought it was going to be so easy and quite challenging. And I try to explain them all there. I've interviewed a couple of really good people just recently. I interviewed Tega Bentley. She has this amazing quilt coat that she has patterned. She's been teaching this class. She's here actually in Toronto, and she's just done wonderful things. They're just beautiful, and she keeps experimenting and pushing the envelope with them. So hopefully you'll give that a watch. And I had the joy to learn sashiko quilting, stitching from Asushi this summer. I think he's in Japan right at the moment, but he got together with me just before he left, and we had a nice chat about sashiko and the culture behind it and the story behind it and the joy of mending and making things beautiful. And I do have another announcement. People are always asking me what my next trip is. So I'm actually leaving for Indonesia at the end of the month, but that there's no capacity left on that. And I'm going to Japan in the spring, but unfortunately that is sold out now too. But my next one after that is Christmas on the Danube. This is going through these wonderful old imperial cities of Budapest, Bratislava, and Vienna. We're going down the Danube in the wintertime in those beautiful on the riverboats. And we're visiting Christmas markets. And of course, there are going to be some textile tie-ins as well. So if you're interested, go over to my website. There's a link there. I've never done a river cruise yet, so this is going to check a box there for that. And I really wanted to go to a Christmas market, so we sat down and tried to figure out where the best ones were. I've always been very fond of Czech glass beads, so looking forward to seeing all that. Joy, you liked hearing about my retreat. I am hoping to get Samantha on the podcast to talk about the retreat for next year. Do I have an opinion about using bed sheets for quilt backing? Well, there are millions of people that do, so go for it. Some sheeting can be really tightly woven, and that may be difficult for your needle to get through. Remember, it has to go through a top, the batting, and then the back. So you might want to do a couple of test drives with the sheeting that you intend to use, just so that you know that you've got the right needle, you have the right thread, and you're working with the right distance there. Okay, let me just move this up here. Do I ever make quilts with fabrics other than cotton or with a variety? And do long arm quilters hate dealing with such quilt tops? Well, it depends on the long armor. There's some people that don't, because they want, as a long armor and a professional long armor, you're wanting everything to go out of your home or out of your business looking like $1 million. People pay for that work and they want it to be beautiful when they get it. Which means when things are not perfect, they have to apply extra effort. It takes longer. Sometimes they have to go backwards to go forwards, and there are quilt tops that are just so difficult to use or to manipulate that it's hardly worth the effort. Now, there's also different skills in long armors. Some people have been doing it for years, and they've quilted a ton of different types of quilts and patterns and fabrics and everything, so that they have a lot of experience, and they may be able to handle it more than the person who has only done 100% quilts, 100% cotton with 100% cotton batting, doing it one way. So I don't want to, it's not anything you should hold against a long armor for saying no. They have to do the work. You have to pay for their work. And it's a negotiation on how much time you're willing to pay for that. Insertions of, like if you're making a patchwork quilt and you throw in a block or two of velvet or silk taffeta or things like that, I don't think that's going to really throw them. You get into the situation where you've got this side of the quilt that's super stretchy, and you've got that side of the quilt that has tights and tight spots and things like that. That's when things get harder to work with. And personally, I am not that experienced of a long armor either that I would take those chances with somebody else's work. So it really depends on what you have. Just remember, whatever you use on your back, it has to be flat. I know I've talked about doing after quilts and doing piecing on the back many times, but if your back is not flat, it's not going to work on a long arm. A long arm only works with a flat back that feeds through the machine nice and evenly. I've worked with knits, I've worked with Minky, but as I say, every time you veer off that 100% cotton, 100% cotton batting, nice flat top, nice flat back, it adds in extra time, extra effort, and maybe some very choice curse words as well. So yeah, that's just what happens. So it depends on how far you want to go off the beaten path and whether you have access to long armors that are willing to go there with you. Okay. Karen has asked, how do you deal with quilters' burnout, even when it's your favorite thing to do? Well, we have burnout because we've pushed ourselves too hard. Sometimes it's the favorite thing that we have to do, but quilting also takes a lot of brain space as you're figuring out how everything fits together. We talked about colors to begin with. We've talked about fabrics. There's block patterns, and your brain is constantly holding this pattern in its head. And when life gets busy, or you've got some you've suffered some loss of some kind, either personally or in your family. It could be financial, it could be emotional, it could be physical. We all have these. Life isn't getting any easier. And I'm finding right at the moment there's an awful lot of stress in the world. There's what we thought were normal. People have just kind of thrown that out the door, and you just every day there's something new that's different that you just cannot believe is happening. So that's throwing all of us off our game. So when you get quilters burnout, the best thing to do is just put the project that you're wanting to do aside and try to do some smaller projects. Just have things with no stakes in it, just something very easy so you don't have to load a lot into your head. Prepare it ahead of time. Sometimes our space is messy and needs a declutter of some kind. So sometimes you need to carve out through all the clutter a place to actually work. So my advice is always get a good night's sleep. And sometimes that's much harder to do than it is to say. Give yourself some grace that you're going through a challenging time. But as you come back to it, don't expect you're going to be able to take on that big project right away. Again, just start with something small, whether it be a mug rug or, a quilt that has just like a Stash Buster #1, or even the one that I just put out this week, the Quick and Slick. Something that can be done very quickly and you're done. You don't have to, and you can just use up your scraps to do it, or use up some of your stash to do that, not worry about it. But yeah, it's hard. It's really hard. All of us are challenged right at the moment, and I feel for you. Cindy just printed the Quick and Slick. I want to thank Gina. She has been helping me make my patterns beautiful. She is just a wonderful sounding board. And she can catch all the things that I can't see. So I'm just so glad to have her on my side. Brooke has asked, any advice on making a quilt as a wedding guest book? When I first started quilting, my very first quilt retreat I went to, my partner, who I did not know before, was making a quilt like that. And what she had was, she had 1 inch, how big were they? I'm pretty sure they were 4-inch squares that she was using. And people were to sign them as they came in the door. She had the laundry marker pens. They're wonderful now. You can get them in all sorts of different colors. It's not like they were before. And she was making stars out of them. They were the center for a star. I think it's called a sawtooth star. But you can either make it ahead of time and they sign it on the quilt, or you can make them as squares. That way people need to take a mulligan, they can. Mulligan means a do-over. If they need to do a do-over, you can have some extra squares on hand. And then you can get colorful with the sawtooth star, depending on what the bride and groom want as their colors. Hoynet 2 has asked, have I ever used a mattress pad in place of batting? No, I have not, but I have heard of some really crazy things used as batting. So my advice, as I say to everyone who wants to try something off the beaten path, is give it a try. I would experiment with a practice piece and see what you think of it. Quilt it. Sometimes those mattress pads have some plastic in it that you don't know about. The real thing is you want to be sure that your quilt remains soft. So if it's, I know I've had quilt pads for my mattress that have been really soft after use over and over and over again. So I can't see why they would not be okay. But the thing also is that if your mattress pad has been used, it's going to have been washed. So the fabric the fabric's on top and the fabric on the back needs to be pre-washed too. If it's brand new, then you've got the opposite problem. Like if you pre-washed your fabrics, but you haven't pre-washed your, you need to make sure you pre-wash that pad. Depending on, it just depends. I'm not quite sure how those quilted lines will come through with the fabrics that you're using, and that's why I'm saying take it for a test drive. After all the hard work of making a quilt top, you want to be sure it's going to work with that mattress pad. But I've heard of people using socks. I've heard of people using old blankets. People use flannel sheets. People use pieces of flannel. There's a lot of different things that people have used in the middle of their quilts. Ooh, Brooke, you're the bride. Congratulations. Congratulations. Okay, Marcia has asked, some of my binding corners are nice and pointy and others are a little rounded. Not the end of the world, but it plagues me that I can't figure out why. What am I doing wrong? I've talked about this before and I cover it in my binding video. So look online under playlist, or just look how to do a binding, and my video should come up. The trick is that when we fold our fabrics over, we've got 2 layers of fabric on top and 2 layers of fabric that are going to be flipped around on the other side. So often when we fold them over, yes, we do 1 layer of that fabric nice and crispy, but we don't do the underside. So I have a tool. I'm just trying to see whether I can see it close at hand. I can't. It's called a 2-in-1 tool, a 3-in-1 tool. There is a link to it on my website. something you can make yourself. I've made mine out of cardboard. I've made them out of Mylar, and my husband has 3D printed me one. You don't want them thick, but it just helps you as you go around the corner, make sure that fabric on the underside is tucked in. And the other point is that you need to be a 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. So you need a 1/4 of an inch, like you've got your corner, and it's a 1/4 of an inch. Let's see here. So it needs to be exactly a 1/4 of an inch right here, because if you go too far, you're going to get a rounded corner. So it's better to be a stitch short than a stitch too far. And those are the two things. So use the 3-in-1 binding tool. That will get your fabrics over. Make sure you hit the corner. And those two things will give you perfect corners every time. And I think I've got a couple of people that can back me up there. I know a lot of people have used it and they're surprised. And that's truly the two things that make the world of difference. Brenda Dyer is asked, do you have any advice on the business of quilting? Well, no matter what business you're in, it's the real key is understanding profit. Understanding that you may have something physical, you may have yourself, your time that you're giving, but the difference between what you charge someone and the difference between what those products and your time cost, that's your profit. And unfortunately, I see so many times in any home-based quilting, people think, oh, I'll do it while I'm watching TV, or I'll have my kids help me do that. And so much of your time, your profit just goes out the door with all these little things. Well, I'll do that, I'll do that, I'll do that. So just always be aware of, you only have a business if you're charging more than your costs. And the other point is understanding how much that is. So let's say you're selling a pattern and you're selling it for $30 and it costs you 25 or 10. I'm just using round numbers just for an example. So when you want to buy a new computer, because that'll make everything so much faster, and you see a price of it, let's say it's $1,000, understand how many patterns you have to sell to cover the cost of that new computer. See it in terms of your product, because so often many people buy these extra things thinking that they'll help them, and it's not going to increase their sales enough to justify that purpose. Or you'll have to work so hard selling your product that you burn out. So those are the biggest the biggest things to understand when you're starting a business, understanding that profit edge. And you have to begin to keep track of your books. You have to be on top of your numbers. Yeah. Corrine has asked, who's on the picture on the shelf behind you? It looks like family. It's a picture of family at my daughter's wedding last year. It's actually a picture of my husband and myself. We're sitting in the front row. We just have the veil of my daughter there, but it was such a good shot. And my son, my eldest son, is behind them, and my son-in-law and my son-in-law by marriage and daughter-in-law by marriage. But it was a beautiful, beautiful wedding. It was just a fabulous day. Just couldn't ask for anything better. Okay, we are at 60 minutes. Holy mackerel. I have to run because I have dogs to deliver. I've been babysitting dogs in the last couple of days, and I have to get them back to their parents. So thank you all very much for your time. I hope I've answered some of your questions well enough that you can go forward with whatever you need to do. Anything else that I need to say? Thanks to Gina. And there will be no There's no Q&A next month because I will be in Indonesia, and by the time I get back, we're going to be into the preparing for the Declutter Challenge. So unfortunately, no Q&A in November, but there will be one in December. And next, not this coming Sunday, but a week Sunday, will be the next installment of Karen's Quilt Crew and the Block of the Month. So if you're part of that, please go to the YouTube posts and you'll see more information on that. Thank you everyone for being here. If you're in Canada, happy Thanksgiving. We have a lot of blessings and a lot to be thankful for. So thank you everyone. And where are we going to be after this? We are, yeah, so Karen's Quilt Crew next weekend. Not this weekend, the next weekend. And I will see you later. Take care, everyone.